My name is Nomi Caldwell, and I never imagined the moment my marriage ended would happen at my husband's office, in front of all his colleagues. And everything I thought was solid collapsed in public. If you've ever trusted someone completely, this story is for you. Tell me where you're watching from and hit subscribe, because what happened next changed my life forever. I didn't plan to walk into that meeting. That part matters because if I had planned it, maybe I would have braced myself. Maybe I would have noticed the way my hands shook when I pushed the glass door open. Maybe I would have heard the warning in my own chest telling me to stop. But I didn't. I was there because the checking account didn't balance. Because a transfer had gone through twice. Because when I texted Grant about it, he read the message and never replied. And because I was tired of feeling like I needed permission to ask questions in my own marriage. The conference room was full. 12 people, give or take. Long table, laptops open, coffee cups. The kind of room where decisions are made and nobody expects a wife to walk in. Grant was sitting near the center, jacket off, sleeves rolled, looking exactly like the man everyone admired, relaxed, confident, in control. When he saw me, his face changed. Not shock, not surprise, fear. I should have turned around right then. Instead, I smiled politely and said, "Sorry, I just need a minute." The room went quiet in that polite, professional way. No one wanted to be rude. No one wanted to be involved. His boss, a man I'd met twice at holiday parties, chuckled lightly and said, "No worries. We were just wrapping up." Then he looked at Grant, grinning, and added, "By the way, before we forget, how's your pregnant wife doing? You must be counting down the weeks by now." The words didn't land all at once. They fell separately. Pregnant. Wife. Counting down the weeks. I waited for my brain to correct it, to fill in the missing context, to make it make sense. Grant didn't speak. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't correct him. He didn't look at me. He stared at the table. The silence stretched too long. Someone shifted in their chair. Another person glanced between us, confused. I heard my own voice before I felt anything. "I'm sorry," I said calmly. "What did you just say?" His boss blinked. Congratulations, right? On the baby?" The room froze. Grant finally looked up at me. His mouth opened, closed again. I felt something drain out of my body. Not anger, not tears. Certainty. "How far along?" I asked, still looking at his boss. 6 months, he said automatically, then stopped himself. His face went pale. "Wait, 6 months." I did the math without meaning to. I saw dates, trips, late nights, excuses I'd accepted because they were easier than fighting. I turned to Grant. "Is that true?" He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Nomi, this isn't—" I held up my hand. "No," I said. "Just answer the question." Every eye in the room was on him now. Executives, colleagues, people who had trusted him, people who were about to watch him lie. "Yes," he said quietly. That was it. One word, no explanation, no apology, just yes. Something inside me went very still. I nodded slowly like I was processing meeting notes. "Okay," I said. Grant reached for my arm. "Please, not here." I stepped back. "You announced it here," I said. "I just heard about it here." Someone at the far end of the table cleared their throat. Another person stood up, muttering about stepping out. His boss looked sick. I had no idea," he said to me. "Grant told us—" "I'm sure he told you whatever was convenient," I said. Grant finally snapped. "Can we talk outside?" he hissed. "You're embarrassing me." That was the moment. Not the pregnancy. Not the betrayal. That sentence. I laughed once, short, sharp. "You don't get to decide what embarrasses you anymore." He tried again to touch me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just said, "Don't." And he stopped. I looked around the room, at the people who had unknowingly watched my marriage collapse in real time. "I'm sorry for the interruption," I said evenly. I won't take up any more of your time. Then I looked back at Grant. You should probably update your emergency contact, I added, because it isn't me. I turned and walked out. The hallway felt longer than it should have. My heels echoed. My legs felt light, like they weren't fully connected to my body. I made it to the elevator before my hands started shaking. The doors closed. My reflection stared back at me. Pale, composed, unrecognizable. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I pressed the lobby button and waited. Outside, the sun was bright. People were laughing across the street. Life was continuing like nothing had happened. My phone buzzed immediately. Grant. 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 I didn't answer. I sat in my car for a full minute with the engine off. Then I whispered, "Okay." Not in defeat, in decision. He had made a mistake thinking humiliation was the worst thing that could happen to him. He had no idea what came after. I drove away knowing one thing with absolute clarity. He had taken something from me in public. I was going to take everything else back. When people ask how long we were married, I used to say the number like it meant safety. 11 years. As if time itself was proof of loyalty. As if longevity meant integrity. It doesn't. Grant and I met in our 20s, when ambition still looked like potential instead of pressure. He was charming in a quiet way, the kind of man who listened closely and made you feel chosen. I was working full-time, finishing certifications, building something of my own. We talked about equality then, about partnership, about building a life side by side. That lasted until it didn't. When he got his first big promotion, the one that came with travel and late nights, we agreed, together supposedly, that I'd scale back. Temporarily, he said. Someone had to manage the house, the schedules, the invisible labor that keeps a family from collapsing. Someone had to be available for school calls and sick days. That someone was me. Our daughter was born 2 years later. Holding her rewired my priorities instantly. I didn't resent stepping back. I told myself I was investing in something bigger than a title. Grant told people he couldn't do what he did without me. I believed him. The finances followed the same logic. His income grew fast. Mine slowed, then stopped. We merged accounts. I handled the day-to-day expenses while he managed investments. When my grandmother passed and left me a modest inheritance, Grant suggested we roll it into a joint account for the future. College fund, home upgrades, security. I said yes. I said yes a lot. The warning signs didn't come all at once. They never do. They arrived quietly, disguised as normal stress. The phone that never left his hand. The screen turned down whenever I walked into a room. The way he started showering the moment he got home, like he needed to wash something off. Trips that didn't line up with his calendar. Excuses that sounded reasonable if you didn't want to look too closely. And I didn't. Because looking closely meant admitting I'd built my life on trust. There were moments I almost asked harder questions. Nights when I lay awake listening to him type messages after midnight. Mornings when his patience with me felt thinner than it used to. I told myself every marriage goes through phases. That love matures into something quieter. What I didn't understand then was that silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's omission. The day of the meeting, after I drove away from his office, I didn't go home. I couldn't. The house felt like it belonged to someone else. I parked near a public trail and sat there until the shock wore off enough to think. 6 months pregnant. That meant the affair had started before his last promotion, before our anniversary trip, before he stood in our kitchen talking about how lucky he was. I called my friend Tamsin. We'd known each other since college. She answered on the second ring. I didn't say hello. I said, "Tell me the truth." There was a pause. "Just long enough." "Know me?" she said quietly. "I was hoping you already knew." My chest tightened. "How long?" "Since last spring," she said. "At least." The air left my lungs. She told me everything she'd hesitated to say before. The woman's name. Someone loosely connected to his professional circle. The way Grant had been seen at events without me. the careful separation of worlds he'd maintained. "And the baby?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "I'm sorry." That was the moment denial died. Not in the conference room, not when he said yes. It died when someone who loved me confirmed that I hadn't imagined any of it. I drove home after that. Slowly, like the house might attack me if I arrived too fast. Our daughter was in her room doing homework, humming to herself. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Mom, you're early." I hugged her longer than usual. She didn't complain. Later that night, after she was asleep, I went through the files Grant thought I never touched. Bank statements, investment accounts, passwords he'd reused carelessly because he assumed I wouldn't check. That's when I saw it. The separate account. The steady transfers. Medical charges I didn't recognize. Expenses that lined up perfectly with 6 months of secrecy. He hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He'd been funding another life. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, surrounded by proof, listening to the quiet of a house I no longer recognized. The stakes crystallized then. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about my financial security, my daughter's future, the years I'd invested under the assumption that we were building something together. Grant had gambled everything we had, and I wasn't going to let him walk away with the winnings. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't crying anymore. I was calculating. And that's when I understood something important. He thought the betrayal ended in that meeting. For me, it had just begun. I didn't confront Grant that night. That choice surprised even me. Part of me wanted to hear him explain himself, to watch him squirm, to demand answers that wouldn't change anything. But another part, the one that had been quietly taking notes for years, understood something essential. Emotion wastes time. Action changes outcomes. By morning, I was done being reactive. I dropped our daughter at school like any other day, smiled at the receptionist, and waited until the house was empty. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the stack of printed statements, and a legal pad. First call, the bank. I didn't freeze the joint account yet. That would have tipped him off too early. Instead, I opened a new account in my name only and transferred a precise amount, enough to cover 6 months of living expenses and legal fees. Not reckless, not vindictive, just responsible. The money was mine, some of it legally, all of it morally. Second call, a family law attorney recommended by Tamsin. I didn't tell her the whole story. I didn't need to. I told her the facts. Infidelity, pregnancy, commingled assets, a child. She listened carefully, then said, "You need to move fast." "I already am," I replied. She walked me through immediate steps, documentation, financial protection, custody positioning. I followed every instruction, screenshots, copies, cloud backups, physical files hidden where Grant never looked because he assumed control meant invisibility. By noon, I had my own credit card. By early afternoon, I had changed the passwords to every account that mattered. I packed that evening. Not dramatically. Not with tears. I folded clothes like I was preparing for a long trip. I took only what belonged to me and our daughter. Essentials, documents, things that couldn't be replaced. The house wasn't leaving. He was. Before he came home, I called a realtor, the one we'd used years ago. She remembered me. "I want to know my options," I said. Quietly. She didn't ask why. By the time Grant pulled into the driveway, the ground beneath him was already shifting. He walked in like nothing had happened, like the meeting had been a misunderstanding, like I was still the woman who waited for him to explain. "We need to talk," he said, setting his keys down carefully. "Yes," I said. "We do." He relaxed slightly. "Mistake. I spoke to an attorney today," I continued. "I also moved money into a separate account. Not everything. Just enough." His face drained of color. "You did what?" he snapped. "I protected myself," I said calmly. "And our daughter." He laughed, sharp, defensive. "You can't just take money." "I can," I said. And I did. That's when the panic showed. Not guilt, not remorse, fear. "You're overreacting," he said. "This doesn't have to get ugly." "It already did," I replied. "I just stopped pretending it didn't." He paced, ran a hand through his hair. "This is a mistake. You're acting emotionally." I looked at him. Really looked. "No," I said. "I'm acting legally." He stopped moving. "I know about the other account," I added. "The medical bills. The transfers. 6 months' worth." Silence. "You've been funding another household," I continued. "That matters." His mouth opened, closed. "I want joint custody," he said finally. I nodded. "We'll let the court decide that." That's when his phone buzzed. He glanced down at it instinctively. I didn't need to see the screen. "You should answer that," I said. "She's probably worried." His head snapped up. "You don't get to do this," he said. "You don't get to turn my life upside down." I stood. "I didn't," I said. "You did." I walked past him down the hallway and into our daughter's room. I kissed her forehead as she slept, steady and safe in a world he'd already fractured. When I came back, Grant was standing exactly where I'd left him. "This isn't over," he said. I picked up my keys. "No," I said. "It started." And as I closed the door behind me, I realized something that made me smile for the first time since the meeting. He thought he was losing me. What he was really losing was control. The first consequence wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors or dramatic scenes. It arrived quietly, the way real damage always does, through access being denied. Grant discovered it the next morning. I knew the exact moment because my phone lit up with 3 missed calls in under a minute. Then a text. "What did you do to the account?" I didn't answer. I was sitting in a small cafe 2 miles from the house, sipping coffee I barely tasted, reviewing emails from my attorney. While Grant was standing in a bank lobby somewhere, confused and irritated, I was already several moves ahead. By noon, the joint account was restricted. Not frozen, yet, but flagged. Any transfer above a modest amount required dual authorization. The separate account he'd used to fund his other life was documented and preserved. He could still see the numbers. He just couldn't move them. That was when panic began to replace arrogance. He showed up at the house that afternoon, furious and breathless, as if speed alone might restore control. I wasn't there. Our daughter was still at school. The silence rattled him more than confrontation ever could. The second consequence hit at work. Grant had always believed his professional reputation was insulated, that personal mistakes stayed personal. He underestimated how quickly credibility erodes when people realize you've been lying in plain sight. The meeting incident had spread. Not loudly, not gossip-level chaos, but quietly. Questions began surfacing about his judgment, about his honesty, about whether the version of Grant they trusted was the real one. By the end of the week, he was removed from a client-facing role temporarily. Not a demotion, technically, just a pause, a review. The word review terrifies men like him. The third consequence found the woman he'd chosen. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't need to. Consequences have a way of traveling on their own. Her social media went dark. Invitations stopped coming. Someone at her workplace noticed inconsistencies in her schedule that aligned too neatly with Grant's former travel. She was suddenly very alone, very exposed, and very aware that the man who promised stability couldn't even control his own finances. She tried to call him. I know because he left his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter one night when I stopped by to pick up documents. I didn't read the messages. I didn't have to. Her name kept appearing, unanswered. The fourth consequence came from our social circle. Couples we'd vacationed with, parents we'd sat beside at school events, people who had assumed we were solid. They didn't call me with questions. They didn't ask for details. They watched. And they chose. Invitations stopped, including Grant. Dinners became awkward when he arrived alone. A few people reached out to me quietly, offering support without prying. The separation wasn't official yet, but the judgment already was. He felt it. That night, he finally cornered me. I was loading groceries into my car when he pulled up beside me, blocking my door. His eyes were red, his confidence cracked. "You're enjoying this," he accused. I closed my trunk calmly. "No, I'm resolving it." "You're ruining me," he said. I met his gaze. "I'm letting consequences do their job. You turned everyone against me." "I didn't say anything," I replied. "You did." He laughed bitterly. "You think you're in control now?" I thought of the attorney emails, the account restrictions, the documented timelines, the custody strategy already forming. "Yes," I said simply. That's when his voice changed. "Please," he said. "Just talk to me." That word, please, landed differently than he expected. It wasn't power. It was proof. Proof that the ground beneath him was gone. "I'll talk through lawyers," I said. He reached for my arm. I stepped back. The next morning, his first desperate attempt arrived. A voicemail. Long, rambling, emotional in a way I'd never heard from him before. Apologies tangled with excuses. Promises layered over panic. He said he loved me. He said he'd made a mistake. He said he didn't know how he'd survive without me. I listened once. Then I saved it. Because by then, I understood something important. The consequences weren't punishing him. They were revealing him. And he was only just beginning to realize how exposed he really was. The invitation arrived 3 days later. Grant's parents were hosting a small family dinner. Nothing formal, just close relatives. A chance, apparently, to clear the air. He forwarded it to me with a message that felt rehearsed. We should both be there. For appearances. For our daughter. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "I'll come." I didn't say why. The house was already full when I arrived. Voices overlapping. Laughter that stopped just a beat too late when I walked in. Grant's mother hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'm so sorry," like she'd been holding it in all week. Grant stood near the dining table, stiff, watching me like a man waiting for a verdict. And then I saw her. She was standing near the window, one hand resting low on her stomach, the other clutching a glass of water like it was an anchor. She looked younger than I expected, tired, nervous, very pregnant. Grant hadn't warned her I'd be there. That much was obvious. We locked eyes for half a second, long enough for recognition to settle in, long enough for her to understand exactly who I was. The room filled around us, chairs scraping, plates being passed. Someone suggested we all sit down. I didn't. "I think we should talk before dinner," I said calmly. The table went quiet. Grant cleared his throat. "Know me, maybe—" "No," I said. "Now is fine." His brother shifted uncomfortably. His father folded his arms, already looking disappointed in a way that felt final. I turned toward the woman by the window. "You must be the one carrying my husband's child," I said evenly. Her face flushed. This isn't an attack," I continued. "I just want clarity. Since I didn't get it the first time." Grant stepped forward. "Stop. This isn't fair." I looked at him. "What's not fair," I said, "is lying to 2 women and expecting silence from both." The room held its breath. I turned back to her. "Did you know he was married?" She hesitated. That was answer enough. "Yes," she said quietly. "He said you were separated." I nodded. "We weren't." Grant's mother gasped softly. "And did you know," I continued, "that he's been using joint funds, my funds, to support you?" Her eyes flicked to Grant. "You said—" "I know what he said," I replied. "I'm telling you what's true." Grant's father spoke for the first time. "Is this accurate?" he asked his son. Grant didn't answer. That silence did more damage than anything I could have said. The woman near the window swallowed hard. "I can't do this," she said suddenly. "I didn't sign up for this." She set the glass down, her hands shaking. I was told you were done, she said to Grant. That everything was settled. She turned to me. I'm sorry. And then she walked out. The front door closed with a finality that echoed through the room. Grant stood frozen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult him. I didn't need to. I want you all to understand something, I said, addressing the table. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to be transparent. I turned back to Grant. You made private decisions that became public the moment you lied to everyone involved, I said. I'm done protecting you from the consequences of that. His mother began to cry quietly. His brother stared at the floor. Grant finally looked at me, eyes wide with something close to desperation. You didn't have to do this, he whispered. I met his gaze steadily. I didn't, I said. You did. I just stopped covering for you. I picked up my purse. For the record, I added calmly, I won't be discussing this again outside of court. Then I paused, just long enough for the words to land. You wanted 2 lives, I said. Now everyone sees the cost. I walked out without looking back. Behind me, the room erupted into voices, angry, disappointed, fractured. I didn't hear them, because for the first time since the meeting, since the pregnancy, since the betrayal, the humiliation wasn't mine, and Grant knew it. Grant tried to regain control the only way he knew how. He talked, not to me, around me. He called mutual friends. He emailed colleagues. He leaned on anyone who would listen and offered a softer version of the truth, one where mistakes were mutual, timelines were blurry, and intentions were misunderstood. In his version, I was emotional, overreacting, turning a private issue into a spectacle. He never said I was lying. He said I was dramatic. That distinction mattered to him. Within days, I could feel the shift. Not support evaporating. Curiosity changing. People didn't confront me, but I could sense the questions forming behind their eyes. The polite distance. The cautious neutrality. That was his goal. Confuse the narrative long enough for fatigue to set in. What he didn't know was that I had already decided not to speak at all. Silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strategy. The escalation began when he made his first real mistake. He posted. Not directly about me, not explicitly. Just a carefully worded message about personal challenges, commitment to family, and privacy during difficult transitions. He framed himself as reflective, mature, responsible. The comments were sympathetic. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the folder I'd been building quietly for weeks. Receipts don't argue. They don't exaggerate. They don't raise their voice. They simply exist. I didn't dump everything at once. That would have looked vindictive. Instead, I released one thing, through my attorney, to the court record. A financial disclosure request. Routine. Necessary. Public. The next morning, someone noticed. By afternoon, people were talking. Transfers, dates, amounts, medical charges linked to the pregnancy. A timeline that didn't bend no matter how gently he tried to reshape it. Grant called me immediately. You're trying to destroy me, he said, his voice tight. I'm documenting, I replied. This is private. It stopped being private when you spent joint money on a separate family. He hung up on me. That same day, an anonymous account surfaced online. No commentary, no insults, just screenshots, redacted appropriately, showing dates and dollar amounts. Someone else had connected the dots publicly. Not me. I watched the reaction unfold like a controlled burn. People weren't outraged, they were disappointed. That's worse. Grant tried to respond. He denied specifics without denying the core. Claimed misunderstandings, claimed stress, claimed he'd been trying to do the right thing, but the timeline was unforgiving. 6 months pregnant, 6 months of transfers, 6 months of lies. The escalation peaked when his firm issued a statement. Short, clinical, carefully worded. They were placing Grant on administrative leave pending review of ethical conduct related to financial disclosures and personal integrity. Personal integrity. I read the words 3 times before they sank in. His credibility, the thing he'd built his entire identity around, was unraveling in public view. That night, my phone rang again. Grant. I let it go to voicemail. He left 3 messages, each one shorter than the last. The final one was barely coherent. "You need to stop," he said. "This is going too far." I didn't respond. The next day, his brother called me instead. "I don't know what you're doing," he said carefully, "but it's everywhere." "I haven't said a word," I replied. He exhaled. "I know." That was the moment I understood the escalation had reached its tipping point. Grant had lost control of the story, not because I attacked him, but because the truth had momentum. The woman who'd been carrying his child stopped defending him. She deleted everything tied to him, removed his name from her life as publicly as she could. Survival instinct kicked in. He was alone. And finally, he showed up. Unannounced. Disheveled. Standing on the sidewalk outside the place I was staying, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "We need to talk," he said when I stepped outside. I crossed my arms. "You said that last time. You're letting people think I'm a monster." I studied him. The man who'd once dictated every major decision in my life. "I'm letting them think whatever the facts support," I said. "You're enjoying this," he accused again, desperate. "No," I replied. "I'm finishing it." His voice cracked. "I can't come back from this." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "You should have thought about that before you created a future that didn't include honesty." I turned to go back inside. Behind me, Grant said the quietest thing he'd said all night. "I don't recognize my life anymore." I paused. "Neither do I," I said. "But only one of us caused that." And as I closed the door, I knew. The escalation wasn't chaos anymore. It was collapse. And he was standing directly underneath it. The legal process didn't feel dramatic. It felt surgical. Once the filings began, everything slowed down on the surface while accelerating underneath. Motions, disclosures, requests, deadlines that didn't care about emotions or excuses. The court didn't ask how sorry Grant was. It asked for numbers, records, consistency. And that was where he unraveled. The financial forensic review confirmed what I already knew. Joint funds used for medical expenses tied to the pregnancy, travel expenses misclassified as work, gifts disguised as reimbursements, a pattern so clean it bordered on careless. My attorney didn't celebrate. She just nodded and said, "This strengthens your position significantly." Strength was an understatement. Grant's lawyer tried early intimidation, letters about cooperation, warnings about reasonable compromise. The tone changed quickly once the evidence stack grew too thick to dismiss. Suddenly, they were asking for extensions, suggesting mediation, floating settlement terms that assumed I'd want to end it quietly. I didn't, not loudly, just correctly. Custody became the first real blow. Grant assumed he'd have leverage. He always had. But the court didn't see a devoted provider fighting unfair exclusion. It saw instability, financial misconduct, poor judgment that directly impacted our child's welfare. Temporary custody was granted to me without argument. When Grant read that order, something in him cracked that never quite came back together. The money followed. Accounts were divided. Assets frozen, then redistributed. The house, the one he'd always referred to as his, was ordered to be sold, proceeds split after restitution. The inheritance funds he'd folded into joint use were traced, documented, and credited back to me. He protested. He lost. Then came his family. Grant's father requested a private meeting with me. Not to defend his son, to apologize. "I raised him better than this," he said, voice tight. "I won't pretend otherwise." He withdrew financial support immediately. Trusts closed. Assistance cut off. His mother stopped returning Grant's calls altogether. Shame settled into that family like dust. Quiet, irreversible. His brother distanced himself publicly. Not out of cruelty, out of self-preservation. Grant was radioactive now. The woman carrying his child filed her own claim shortly after. Support, stability, guarantees he could no longer provide. She'd believed promises built on money that wasn't his to spend. When the accounts dried up, so did her loyalty. She moved back in with her parents, removed his name from everything, reduced him to a legal obligation. Not a partner, not a future. Grant tried to fight back. He borrowed. He delayed. He blamed me for turning everyone against him. The court didn't care. Neither did his employer, who finalized his termination after the ethics review concluded. The official reason was vague. The message wasn't. By the time the divorce decree was finalized, Grant had lost the house, the job, the reputation, and the illusion of control that had carried him for years. He rented a small place on the edge of town. Temporary, he said. Everything was temporary now. The last financial disclosure showed it clearly. He was broke. Not poor. Not destitute. Just stripped of advantage. And for a man who'd built his identity on leverage, that was annihilation. I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure. On the day the final orders were signed, I walked out of the courthouse into bright daylight with my attorney beside me. "It's done," she said. I nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated. "Most people don't handle this as cleanly as you did." I looked ahead, not back. Most people don't realize they're allowed to stop protecting someone who's hurting them. Grant stood across the street, alone, watching. No family, no allies, just the consequences of every decision he'd made layered neatly around him. He didn't approach me. He didn't have anything left to say. And that was the most devastating outcome of all. Not that he lost everything, but that he finally understood he deserved to. We met one last time because the court required it. A brief, final exchange to settle remaining logistics. Property retrieval. Documentation. Closure, according to the paperwork. There is no box for closure. There is only distance. The meeting room was small and neutral, designed to prevent emotion from echoing. Beige walls, a round table, 2 chairs placed far enough apart to suggest civility, close enough to force eye contact. Grant arrived early. That alone told me everything. He stood when I entered, unsure whether to approach. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him. Not sick. Worn. The kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting gravity after the ground has already disappeared. "Thanks for coming," he said. I sat down. "This is required." He nodded. Sat. Folded his hands like a man preparing to confess something that wouldn't change the verdict. "I won't take much of your time," he said quickly. I wanted to say a few things." I waited. He swallowed. "I know you think I'm only here because I've lost everything." I said nothing. "But I've had time to think," he continued. "About us. About what I did." The words, "what I did," hovered there, vague and incomplete. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. "It started as a mistake. I was overwhelmed. I didn't feel seen. You were always busy with—" I raised my hand. "No," I said quietly. "Don't do that." He stopped. "This is not a performance," I continued. "And I'm not the audience you think I am." His jaw tightened. "I'm just trying to explain. I already understand," I said. "Better than you do." He leaned forward. "I loved you." I looked at him fully then, not with anger, not with nostalgia, with clarity. "You loved what I provided," I said. "Stability, silence, cover." "That's not fair," he snapped. I didn't flinch. "It's accurate." He shook his head, running his hands through his hair. "I'm not asking you to come back. I know that's gone. I need to know if you believe I'm a bad person." The question surprised me. I considered it carefully. "No," I said. "I think you're a careful one. You weighed your options. You calculated risk. You assumed I'd absorb the damage." He stared at me. "That doesn't make you evil," I continued. "It makes you responsible." Silence filled the room again. "I don't recognize myself anymore," he said quietly. "I don't know how to rebuild from this." That's not my work, I replied. His voice cracked. I lost my family. I tilted my head slightly. No. You traded it. He closed his eyes. I miss you, he said. Every day. I felt something then. Not longing, not sadness, distance. You miss the version of me that made your life easier, I said. She doesn't exist. He opened his eyes, desperate now. Can you at least tell me you don't hate me? I thought of the conference room, the pregnancy announcement, the months of deception, the money redirected, the child caught in the aftermath. I don't hate you, I said. Hate requires attachment. That landed. He exhaled shakily. Is there anything I can do? I gathered my folder, stood. Yes, I said. Hope flickered across his face. Leave me alone, I finished. It vanished. He stood too quickly. You can't just erase me. I'm not erasing you, I said calmly. I'm placing you where you belong. And where is that? He demanded. In the past, I replied. He took a step toward me. Know me, please. I met his eyes one last time. You stood in a room full of people and let me find out I was replaceable, I said. This is me returning the favor. His shoulders sagged. I never thought you'd become this cold. I didn't smile. I became precise, I said. There's a difference. I turned toward the door. Behind me, his voice broke completely. I don't know how to live with this. I paused, hand on the handle. You'll figure it out, I said without looking back. You always said you were good at adapting. And then I left. The door closed softly. No applause. No shouting. No final dramatic moment. Just a boundary. Enforced. When I stepped outside, the air felt lighter than it had in years. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle into my bones. He had begged. He had pleaded. And it hadn't moved me at all. That was how I knew it was over. Not because he was finished, but because I was. A year passed without announcement. No dramatic rebirth. No public victory lap. Just quiet days stacking on top of each other until they began to feel like a life again. I moved into a smaller place on the other side of town. Light-filled, manageable, mine. The kind of home that didn't echo with old arguments or expectations. Our daughter chose the paint color for her room. She picked something bright. I let her. She adjusted faster than I expected. Children notice everything, but they also adapt when stability replaces tension. Her grades stayed steady. Her laughter came back. She stopped asking questions she was afraid to hear the answers to. When she talked about her father, it was factual, not aching. That told me I'd done the right thing. I returned to work slowly, deliberately. Not chasing what I used to be, but building something that fit who I was now. My confidence didn't announce itself anymore. It showed up in decisions made without hesitation, in contracts reviewed carefully, in boundaries enforced without apology. Money stopped feeling like leverage and started feeling like a tool. I slept through the night. That alone felt like a victory. Grant faded the way people do when they're no longer relevant to your daily reality. I heard things occasionally, through someone who heard it from someone else. Temporary jobs, missed obligations, a life reduced to logistics. No rage attached to it, just distance. The woman who had his child moved on quickly. New support system, new priorities. I didn't track it. I didn't need to. That chapter belonged to him, not me. The only time I saw Grant again was accidental. A grocery store. Early evening. Ordinary. He stood in line 2 aisles over. Thinner, quieter, unremarkable. He noticed me at the same time I noticed him. Our eyes met briefly. There was no confrontation, no bitterness, just recognition. And then he looked away. That was the moment I understood the full transformation. Not that he'd lost power, but that I no longer reacted to it. I paid for my groceries, loaded my car, drove home to a life that didn't require vigilance. Later that night, I sat on the porch while my daughter did homework inside. The air was warm, calm. The kind of peace that comes from alignment, not avoidance. I thought back to the woman who walked into that meeting expecting answers and walked out with a fracture she didn't choose. She didn't know yet that betrayal doesn't end you. It clarifies you. Grant had believed loyalty meant silence. That love meant absorption. That I would keep the structure standing no matter how recklessly he behaved inside it. He was wrong. Freedom didn't arrive with forgiveness. It arrived with truth, followed by action, followed by the courage to never negotiate your worth again. Some people lose everything and call it tragedy. Others lose illusions and call it beginning. I didn't get revenge by destroying him. I got it by becoming unreachable. And that, I've learned, is the kind of ending no betrayal can take away. Thank you for tuning in to the Velvet Revenge channel. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories. See you soon!